At my birthday dinner, my mom raised her glass. Then she spoke loud enough for the whole table. We all agreed Janice should sell her house. Give the money to Jennifer's baby fund. She needs it more. My cousins clapped. My father smiled. My sister dabbed fake tears with a napkin. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply raised my own glass. Then I unlocked my phone. And I read a fresh email from my bank. The words made every fork hit China at once. $2,400,000. That was my reality. And they wanted my house. My name is Janice Hayes. This is the story of how I finally stopped playing their game. Sometimes silence is louder than rage. In my family, I'm the older daughter. The responsible one. The steady one. The one who was told to be perfect. Straight A's weren't optional. They were expected. College scholarships, 2 jobs, nights studying until dawn. I lived on ramen and black coffee. Every penny I saved felt like oxygen. While Jennifer? She stumbled from one part-time job to another. She quit classes, dropped out of college. She spent nights out, mornings hungover, and somehow always forgiven. Golden child. Miracle baby. Untouchable. Me, I was praised only when useful. Then quickly forgotten when Jennifer cried louder. At 25, I bought my first apartment. Mom told everyone it felt cold. At 30, I bought my dream house. She called it too big for one person. Jennifer? She failed upward. Quit after 1 semester, praised for finding herself. Switched jobs 17 times. Applauded for trying. Moved back home, and they called her resilient. No matter how I bled, she shone brighter in their eyes. Holidays were the worst. Don't wait too long, Janice. Your eggs aren't getting younger. Money won't keep you warm at night. That last one came from Dad. It carved a wound that never healed. Because money had kept me alive. Money had been the reason I could eat, study, survive. While Jennifer ate dinners charged to Dad's card, she wore new clothes every season. And I recycled the same coat for 5 winters. Every success I earned was treated like a fluke. Every failure of hers was treated like fate. That night at my birthday table, nothing had changed. I was still the selfish one. The woman with too much. The one expected to sacrifice again. But inside me, something snapped. This time, I wasn't going to fold. After that night, the silence inside me grew louder. I stopped chasing their approval. But deep down, I still carried the wound. Because it's not easy to unlearn neglect. I kept working. 12-hour days at the firm. Numbers, spreadsheets, deadlines, they were predictable. Unlike family, they followed rules. At least with money, effort meant results. So I poured myself into it. Promotions came, one after another. My colleagues clapped, my boss smiled. But when the applause ended, loneliness stayed. No one at home to ask how my day was. No one to say I'm proud of you. Jennifer never missed a chance to remind me. You'll die alone in that house, she sneered once. I laughed, but it cut deep. Because part of me feared she was right. Nights felt endless in that too big house. I'd sit on the couch with takeout, wine half finished, scrolling through social media like a ghost. Birth announcements, wedding photos, family vacations. And me, silence, the forgotten daughter, the successful mistake. Sometimes I wondered if I was cursed. If no matter how hard I worked, it would never matter. Because in my family's eyes, Jennifer's failures weighed more than my triumphs. Every time she stumbled, I was expected to catch her. Every time I soared, they clipped my wings. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I slowed down, the emptiness swallowed me whole. So I kept building. Paycheck after paycheck. Bonus after bonus. I studied markets, built portfolios, diversified. My worth on paper climbed into the millions. But worth in their eyes? 0. At dinners, I was the background character. Conversations circled Jennifer's pregnancy, Jennifer's struggles, Jennifer's bravery. I could have cured cancer. They'd still ask if I was dating anyone. Once Aunt Linda leaned close, whispering, "Don't you ever want to be normal?" Normal. As if mediocrity was better than independence. As if my ambition was a disease. I smiled, swallowed the words burning my tongue, and went back to cleaning dishes while Jennifer napped on the couch. Years passed like that. I learned patience, the art of biting my tongue. I let them underestimate me, dismiss me, call me cold. Because somewhere inside I was waiting. Waiting for the moment I could stand tall. Waiting for the day they'd see. Not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted proof. Proof that surviving their neglect hadn't been for nothing. And when that moment finally came, it was sharper, louder, and more devastating than I ever imagined. The birthday ambush was only the beginning. The room was buzzing with fake warmth. Forks clinked against plates, glasses half full of cheap wine. Then Mom stood up. Her voice rose above the chatter. "We all agree," she said, eyes sweeping the table. "You should sell your house. Give the money to your sister's baby fund. She needs it more." My cousins clapped like trained seals. Dad smiled, proud of her announcement. Jennifer dabbed at her eyes, fake tears shimmering. I froze, fork still in hand. They really thought I'd give away my home. The house I bled for. The house I built brick by brick with sacrifice. Jennifer leaned in, voice trembling. "That's so generous, Janice. I knew you'd come through." Her words were daggers dipped in sugar. Something inside me snapped. But not loud. Not messy. Cold. I raised my wineglass slowly, took a sip, savoring the pause, then reached for my phone. "You want me to sell my house?" My voice was steady, even amused. "Yes," Mom said firmly. "Family takes care of family. Family takes care of family," I repeated softly. "That's nice." My thumb hovered over the screen. "Let me show you something." I opened the email from my bank. Earlier today, it had been routine. Now it was a weapon. "Dear Ms. Hayes," I read aloud. "We are pleased to inform you." The room quieted. Every eye on me. "Your total assets under management have exceeded 2.4 million. I let the words linger. Every fork dropped. Every smile vanished. Jennifer's mouth hung open. Brandon tried to do math in his head. Mom went pale. Dad blinked like he'd misheard. "That's what I'm worth. Not counting this house." I set my phone down deliberately. "You want me to sell my $400,000 home? And hand over scraps while I sit on millions?" Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Stephanie squeaked. "Over 2 million? How?" "I worked. I saved. I invested. While you all mocked my choices." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think I don't know struggle? I starved on rice and beans. I wore the same coat 5 winters. While Jennifer used Dad's card at restaurants." Jennifer's voice shook. "You don't understand. I'm struggling now." "No," I cut her off. "You're reckless. And now you expect me to bleed for it." I leaned forward, eyes sweeping the table. "You never asked for help. You demanded everything. You tried to shame me in my own home." I stood, chair scraping against hardwood. My chest rose with years of swallowed rage. Their eyes avoided mine, full of guilt, full of fear. "This party is over. Get out." I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just ended it. They came for my house. Instead, they left with the truth. The text didn't stop. Buzz after buzz, one guilt trip after another. "Mom, you humiliated us. We only wanted what's best." "Dad, you embarrassed the family." "Jennifer, I hope you choke on your money." I stared at the screen, almost laughing. This was their idea of love. Stephanie chimed in about Uncle Ray. Tyler accused me of being selfish. Aunt Carol said pride comes before a fall. I set the phone down. For the first time, silence felt like armor. But then came Brandon. A certified letter, a lawyer's name, threatening to sue me for promises unfulfilled. I laughed out loud in my office. My attorney, Michelle, nearly cackled when I forwarded it. "This isn't worth the paper it's printed on," she said. Empty threats from desperate people. Still, it showed me just how far they'd go. Not just guilt. Not just pressure. Now, manipulation with legal stationery. I refused to flinch. The family group chat, though, I forgot to leave it. My cousin Tyler's girlfriend Hannah DM'd me later. "Honestly, I think they're unreasonable. Not everyone sees you as the villain." That one message felt like oxygen. At least someone had seen the truth. Then Mom showed up on my porch. Hair disheveled, makeup streaked, voice shaking. "Janice, please, we can fix this. We'll buy you a car. I cut her off. "I don't want a guilt gift. I don't want a panic purchase. I wanted respect, Mom. And you chose Jennifer's tears over my years." Her eyes filled again. "You'll regret this when you're alone." I stepped back. "No, I regret waiting 32 years to say no." She left with her shoulders slumped. But my own stayed straight. That night, I poured wine. Reread the bank email. 2.4 million. My number, my life, my proof. The phone kept buzzing on the counter. More missed calls. More desperate pleas. I let it ring. For years, I'd begged for crumbs. Now they were begging me. The power shift was dizzying and intoxicating. I thought of all the birthdays forgotten. All the nights I stayed late at work, building something no one believed in. Every insult disguised as advice. Every reminder that Jennifer mattered more. It hit me. I'd already been alone all this time. But now, at least, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. And as I sipped, I thought, maybe family isn't blood. Maybe it's the people who clap when you rise, not cheer when you're asked to fall. They wanted my house. Instead, I gave them the truth. And it was worth more than any mansion. The morning after, the house was quiet. No buzzing phone. No guilt bleeding through the walls. Just sunlight cutting across my living room. I sat at the same table where everything had exploded. Where my mother demanded. My cousins cheered. My sister wiped fake tears. And I realized something. I didn't lose my family that night. I lost the illusion of having one. The truth is, they never celebrated me. They tolerated me when I was useful, dismissed me when I wasn't. And that's not family. Family shows up on your birthday. Family asks about your dreams. Family doesn't measure your worth by what you can hand over. I used to think setting boundaries was cruelty, that saying no was selfish. But it's survival. And it's freedom. Because here's what happened next. I created my own circle. Friends who remember the little things. Colleagues who respect my work. People who clap when I rise. Neighbors who check in unasked. Who bring soup when I'm sick. Who remember my dog's name. That's family too. And as for Jennifer, she'll have to build her own life. Her child will grow up learning that not everyone gets bailed out. Some lessons hurt, but they're necessary. I'm not her safety net. I'm not their investment. I'm not the villain in their story. I'm the author of mine, page by page, choice by choice, without begging for permission anymore. And maybe one day, I'll sit at a birthday table, surrounded by people who chose me, not out of obligation, but out of love. We'll pass cake and laughter, no one counting favors, no one keeping score. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've been told you're selfish for protecting what you earned, you're not alone. Have you ever faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the strength to finally walk away before saying goodbye. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Don't forget to subscribe for more true family betrayal stories that reminds us we are stronger than we think.
The package was small, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Clean architectural strokes. My father's. I hadn't seen it since the day I left his house 7 years ago with a split lip and a promise to never look back. Inside was a dark wooden box polished and lined with navy velvet. One piece of chocolate rested at the center, perfectly molded, glossy, dusted with gold powder like it had come from a boutique. A folded note sat beneath it, for the strongest one. Love, Dad. No apology, no explanation. Just that. I stared at it on my kitchen counter, not touching it, not throwing it away either. Irina arrived an hour later with Micah in tow, carrying a lopsided cake and enough candles to embarrass me. Her hair was pulled back in its usual rushed bun, and Micah was already pulling magnets off the fridge before she'd unzipped her coat. "What's that?" she asked, nodding to the box. "A gift," I said. "From Dad." Her eyebrows shot up. Dad, as in, vanished after Mom's funeral? Dad, the very same. I opened the lid to show her. A single chocolate, because nothing says, "Sorry I emotionally terrorized your entire adolescence," like confectionery. Irina laughed, shaking her head. Weird flex. Want it? I offered, half joking, half uncomfortable. I'm not eating anything he made. She looked at me, then shrugged. Why not? Free chocolate. She popped it into her mouth before I could say anything else. I remember her chewing slowly, brow furrowing. Tastes like lavender. And fennel. 15 minutes later, she said her stomach hurt. 20 minutes in, she collapsed on my bathroom floor, shaking cold sweat pouring down her face as Micah screamed from the hallway. I rode with her in the ambulance. They asked what she'd eaten. I told them. A single piece of chocolate, made by my father, and meant for me. The ER nurse said they caught it early. Irina's vitals were stable, though her blood pressure had dipped dangerously low. They were running a tox screen just in case. I sat beside her unconscious form, watching the monitor beep its steady rhythm. Micah slept in the pediatric wing. I had promised him too brightly that everything would be okay. The moment the curtain drew shut around Irina's bed, I felt it the weight of something old, something unfinished. Mom had been sick a lot, hadn't she? Nausea that never made sense. Migraines that came out of nowhere. Stomach flus no one else caught. She always said she was just sensitive, but Dad had his own theories. She was too emotional, too soft, Stress-related, he'd say flatly, like she'd chosen to collapse on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning. Then, he'd serve her herbal tea from the cabinet he locked. When I was 12, I'd asked why he kept the tea behind a padlock. He'd answered without looking up. Not everything is meant for everyone. I hadn't thought of that moment in years. Now it felt radioactive. I stepped out to the corridor into the hospital's fake citrus air. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A number I didn't have saved, but I knew it. I could feel it in my chest before I saw the digits. I picked up. Hello? A pause. Then his voice measured distant familiar in all the wrong ways. Corinne. Did you like the chocolate I swallowed hard? I gave it to Irina. Silence. Long enough to stretch warp curdle. You did what his tone shifted tight and sharp. She's in the hospital. I said, my voice low. I'm with her now. He didn't respond. Just a click. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, and for the first time I didn't feel confused. I felt cold and certain. It hadn't been a gesture. It had been a test, a message, a warning, and I had passed it to the wrong person. I hadn't been back to the old house since I left for college. I kept the keys mostly out of inertia. The place hadn't been touched in years. Dust clung to the baseboards like memories too stubborn to sweep away. The study still smelled like him sharp chemical dry. I opened drawer after drawer, finding nothing but old receipts and inkless pens. Until I got to the bottom desk drawer, the one with the tarnished brass lock. It had been jammed shut when I was a kid. Now it gave with a hard tug. Inside were dozens of papers stacked and yellowed. Some were prescriptions in his name, others handwritten formulas, ratios of herbs. I didn't recognize monkshood aconite belladonna. There were notations in the margins. Observe after 4 minutes. Sweat onset. Success. One card was labeled Helen 1989, written in the same tidy script from the chocolate box. I dropped it. I remembered the night Mom passed out after sipping tea with him. He'd insisted she was dehydrated. I'd made her toast, but she vomited before she could eat it. The ER called it a virus. He'd called it emotional hysteria. I walked back into the hallway, trying to shake the cloying smell of dried rosemary and floor polish. Micah was sitting on the stairs, tracing the edges of the banister. "This place is spooky," he whispered. "Did Grandpa live here too?" "He used to." "He was here last week," Micah added without looking at me. "When you went to the store." He knocked on the back door. I didn't answer, but he left something on the porch. My chest tightened. What did he say? Micah turned to me slowly. He told me secrets taste sweet, and that I'd know when I was ready. My breath caught. "Did you eat anything he gave you?" He shook his head. I threw it in the bushes. It smelled like cough medicine. I crouched and hugged him too tightly. He wriggled away, annoyed. Outside, I found the neighbor, Mrs. Keene, trimming her hydrangeas. When I asked about Silas, she nodded grimly. Moved out to a cabin in Indiana. No internet, no phone. Said he wanted to be closer to the source. Whatever that means. I knew what it meant, and I wasn't waiting for him to show up again. Maeve Adley lived in a room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and forgotten time. Her voice was still sharp, though age had softened the edges of her face. When I told the receptionist I was Corinne Lark, her expression shifted. "She's been asking for you." I wasn't sure what I expected when I stepped in, perhaps denial or confusion. But Maeve took one look at me and said, "So, he started again." She didn't need me to explain. She already knew. We sat in silence for a while. She sipped chamomile tea from a cracked mug with her name printed on it in fading vinyl. "Your father was never as smart as he thought he was," she said eventually. "But he was observant, dangerous in the way people are when they believe they're special." I asked about my grandfather. Edward Lark, she said, as if the name itself left a bitter taste. Licensed pharmacist, revered elder, dosed his own wife with remedies when she got too moody, kept a locked cupboard full of extracts and poisons, all documented like a scientist, but with none of the ethics. She paused. "There was a girl, Leora. Your grandfather took her in, said she was a distant cousin, sweet girl, Always tired, always pale. She was gone before she turned 15. They said her mother came and took her back. But I knew better. Maeve stood slowly and walked to her closet. From a tin box on the top shelf, she pulled out a small glass vial, amber colored with a faded label in delicate cursive. Leora Final Stage. I held it like it might burn. The residue at the bottom clung to the glass like something alive. He kept records. Your father found them. Obsessed over them, Maeve said. Helen, your mother, tried to get him to stop. That's when things got worse. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He thinks he's continuing some grand work, she said. But really, he's just repeating it. When I left, the sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I kept the vial in my coat pocket wrapped in a handkerchief, feeling its weight as I drove straight toward Indiana. The driveway was a narrow strip of gravel flanked by bare trees and tangled brush. His truck wasn't there. No lights on. I parked out of sight, waited a full 10 minutes, then tried the back door. It gave under light pressure, creaking like it hadn't been opened in weeks. Inside, the air was dense, a blend of dried herbs dust and something sharper metallic, like the inside of a forgotten drawer full of razors. The kitchen had no food, just rows of apothecary-style jars on open shelves. Each was meticulously labeled Aconitum digitalis henbane valerian. Some held dried leaves, others thick pastes or powdered resin. Then there were smaller jars, some empty others filled with buttons, bits of lace lengths of ribbon, even what looked like tufts of hair. At the center of the shelf, a single jar caught my eye. The handwriting on the label was smaller than the others and cleaner. Corinne proof. My throat tightened. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know. In the next room, what must have once been a study had transformed into something else. The walls were lined with framed botanical illustrations and taped diagrams of the human nervous system. At the far end of the room was a desk cluttered with papers, photographs, and vials, but it was the cabinet beside it that pulled me forward. The top drawer was locked. I took a fire poker from the hearth and pried it open. Inside, dozens of photographs, all black and white, girls and young women. Some looked like school portraits. Others were candid shots smiling at picnics sitting on porches. On the back of each one, a name and a single word. Aurelia Pure Juniper Failed Elise-Resistant Leora Final Stage. Then I found the one labeled Helen First Betrayal. I dropped it. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Beneath the drawer was a shallow altar. That's the only word that fits. 3 white candles sat melted down to the base. Tufts of burnt hair in a small clay bowl, and in the center a chunk of chocolate, discolored, dusty, familiar. It was identical to the one he'd sent me. This wasn't madness, it was ritual. It had rules, ingredients, instructions. And I had nearly followed them. I backed away, heart pounding, ready to leave, but a sound froze me, a sharp click followed by the soft groan of hinges. The front door had just opened. I didn't get caught. Whoever opened the door must have left again or hadn't come in all the way. I drove through the night with the windows cracked, just enough to keep me awake, the jar labeled with my name strapped into the passenger seat like a passenger I couldn't ignore. The next morning, Detective Reese Mercer was waiting for me outside the hospital. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, thoughtful eyes, too calm for someone in homicide. We sat in an unmarked car in the garage while he read from a folder. Preliminary talks screen came back. Your sister had trace amounts of Aconitum napellus. Monkshood, he said, flipping a page. Highly toxic. Fast acting. I nodded. I already knew. What you might not know, he continued, is that your father's fingerprints just matched partials in a 1986 missing person case. A nurse named Evelyn Rhodes. Went out with a hospital orderly. Never came back. He was using the alias Charles Fenn. But the prints match Silas. I stared ahead, and yet he kept mine. We also found your DNA on the wrapper from the chocolate box he added, not Irina's. I turned toward him slowly. So that chocolate wasn't for her, he said. He wanted it to be you. I didn't flinch. Then he miscalculated. Mercer hesitated, then handed me an envelope. This came to the precinct this morning. No return address. Your name. He knew where to send it. Inside was a single card, thick and off-white, the ink pressed deep into the paper. Only the worthy one carries the line forward. The weak dissolve. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. He wasn't just trying to eliminate me. He was trying to shape me, to bend me into something he could justify. The next phase of whatever twisted legacy he believed he was preserving. He wasn't hunting me. He was grooming me to replace him. And he wasn't finished. The call came at 2:14 p.m. Irina's voice was already hoarse with panic. They said he had a fever, she cried. A woman showed hospital ID, said she was taking Micah for labs. The nurse turned away for 1 second and they were gone. We traced the van to a rural camera hit heading east fast. Mercer's contact and property records found a match an abandoned community center 20 minutes out listed under a foundation Silas had donated to 2 years ago. A place I didn't even know he was connected to. We didn't wait for backup. The parking lot was empty, but not quiet. Wind rustled through a half-collapsed swing set out back. Inside the building was still wired for emergency lights. The air was warm, unnaturally sweet spices and sugar like a bakery just after dawn. The kitchen door creaked when Mercer pushed it open. He was standing there back to us. White apron. Calm. Like we'd arrived early to a demonstration. Micah sat in a chair slumped but breathing. A faint line of drool ran from his mouth to his shirt. I didn't harm him, Silas said without turning. He's untouched. This isn't his trial. He gestured to a tray of chocolates. Fresh. Identical to the one he had sent me. This is the last test, Corinne. If you are who I believe, you'll survive it. You'll understand. I stepped forward slowly, took one piece in trembling fingers, brought it close to my lips. He smiled just slightly. Then I threw the tray. It hit the wall and shattered into pieces. He lunged at me, hand catching my wrist hard enough to bruise. I fought back adrenaline, making my movements wild and wide. He was stronger, but he was also slower. Mercer tackled him from the side, pinning him with practiced weight. Silas squirmed, then slipped free with a sharp twist and bolted through the rear exit, disappearing into the trees. Mercer cursed, pulled his radio. He's on foot, heading north through the woods. I ran to Micah and cradled his face in my hands. His breath was steady. Mercer called in the medics to back up the full report, but I couldn't stay. I looked at Mercer. We finish this? I said, and then I followed Silas into the trees. They found him an hour after I did, kneeling in the underbrush, arms streaked with scratches, mumbling about lineage and blood and taste. He didn't resist when the officers pulled him up. His hands were still stained with soil and melted chocolate. The forensics report uncovered more than I was prepared for. Records, preserved samples, tapes, a hand-drawn book with dosage charts spanning 3 decades. Silas hadn't just kept track, he'd documented, refined, archived. There were names I didn't recognize. There were some I did. They charged him with multiple counts of attempted murder, and with new evidence reopened at least 2 cold cases. I didn't attend the arraignment. I didn't want his eyes finding mine in a courtroom. Let the state handle him. My job was to repair what he'd spent a lifetime unraveling. Maeve passed away 3 weeks after his arrest. Her heart, they said, though I suspected the real cause was the release of weight she'd carried alone for far too long. Among her belongings was a locked tin addressed to me. Inside her nursing journals, yellowed pages scrawled in a hand that had steadied many dying people and documented the quiet pain of one family. One entry read, Corinne's mother second attempt. Weaker symptoms. Adjustments made. Irina recovered slowly. The tremors subsided. Micah went back to school. He drew a picture of me with a big shield and labeled it anti-food guard. I pinned it to the fridge without a word. Therapy didn't fix me, but it gave shape to the mess and room to breathe around it. I started attending a group for survivors of covert abuse women whose caretakers used love as a leash. Eventually, I began leading one. I started writing anonymously, too, just short reflections. One found its way into a magazine's wellness column. The final line read, Love isn't a test, It's not something you survive. It's what nourishes without asking for proof. One morning, I passed a bakery near the corner of my street. A teenager stood outside holding a tray of truffles. "Free sample?" she asked, smiling. I paused, looked at the chocolate, looked at her, then smiled back. "No, thank you." And I kept walking. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood that I could choose what fed me and what didn't. The red folder landed on my desk the same moment my phone lit up with a message from my mother. Her text read, "Linda, can you help design the invites for Dad's 40th anniversary dinner? You've always had such a creative touch." I tapped the phone screen once, let it go dark, then turned to the folder. It was marked Next Mind Academy Urgent Asset Review. I hadn't heard that name in over 2 years. Not since Brian, the older brother who once built a solar-powered robot in 6th grade, started calling himself the founder of the future of American education. I flipped the cover open. Page 1. Payroll delinquent 2 months IRS lien filed $84 $200 licensing flag State Board of Education probation pending audit review. Page 3 was worse. I saw a familiar address, then a familiar name, not mine. Brian H. Walsh listed as the primary owner and registered financial agent. I sat back. The same Brian who'd stood in our parents' backyard last Easter with a Napa Valley Red in one hand and a Bluetooth mic in the other, giving a toast about revolutionizing learning for gifted youth. The same Brian who once told a room full of relatives that I mostly handled flyers and logistics at the fund I work for. Beacon Horizons doesn't deal in flyers. We fund and acquire failing schools. We keep the good ones standing. And right now, I was staring at his school that was days from collapse. What I didn't know yet was whether Brian knew it too. It started at the science fair. Brian brought a robot that tracked sunlight. I brought a hand-drawn chart tracing our family tree back to 1892. His table had wires and wheels. Mine had poster board and glue. Dad asked him how he'd coded the circuit. He asked me if I remembered to spell genealogy right. That hierarchy never left the house. Brian became the brain, the one with purpose. I became the helper, the one who knew how to organize things. In high school, I made the honor roll every semester. Brian missed one and Mom scheduled a teacher conference. He went to MIT for physics. I went to Wharton for business. When I got my MBA, Dad said, "That's great, honey." So what kind of assistant work will that lead to? By the time Brian dropped out of grad school to start a charter academy, my parents called it a bold pivot. They mortgaged their vacation condo in Michigan to help him get started. When I joined Beacon Horizons as a junior analyst that same year, I emailed them the news. Mom replied, "Sounds exciting, sweetie. Brian's launching his own school this month, can you believe it?" I didn't mind, not at first. I told myself it was just family blindness, that some people shine brighter because others tilt the light their way. But when Brian took the mic at Thanksgiving last year and joked that I made good PowerPoints for smart people, something shifted. I had built 5 school acquisitions that quarter. He hadn't made payroll in 2 months. And yet somehow the applause always found him. Grandma Ruth always saw more than she said. She taught math at a public high school in the 1970s when most women were still expected to teach home economics. She wore cardigans with chalk dust in the sleeves and once told me that solving equations calmed her more than prayer. She came to visit me in Boston last spring, just before the Beacon Board renewed my promotion. We sat in my narrow kitchen, the kind where everything echoes just a little, and shared a pot of black coffee. She pointed to a framed photo near the sink, me at 26 standing in front of a ribbon cutting at a charter school we'd helped rescue. "Do they know what you actually do?" she asked. I laughed but didn't answer. She nodded. "They'll ask one day, but not because they're curious, because they'll have no choice." I remember staring at the rim of her mug as she said it. One chip barely visible, the kind of thing you only notice if you've been looking at the same cup for decades. I didn't know then how close we were to that moment. I stayed long after my team filed out and the motion sensor lights dimmed the city below, already sliding into its silver evening because the red folder still sat on my desk like an unanswered summons. I peeled it open again slower this time, the pages crackling as though they could feel my hesitation. The cover memo from compliance spelled it out in bold, pre-distressed asset expedite valuation. Beacon reserved that label for schools seconds from foreclosure roofs leaking onto fading bleachers, not for a gleaming STEM academy Brian boasted about online. The cash flow table told the harsher story. Tuition receivables down 43% year over year, vendor invoices at 90 days past due, an IRS payroll tax line stamped in red. But what froze me wasn't the numbers. It was the ownership tree Next Mind Academy listed as a wholly owned subsidiary of Hart Educational Holdings, LLC, domiciled in Delaware. Managing member B. Hart. Only when I cross-checked officer signatures did the initials unfold into Brian Hamilton Walsh. My brother had buried himself under a borrowed middle name as if paperwork could reinvent blood. I pushed the folder away, stood and paced the length of glass wall behind my chair, counting breaths like Grandma once taught me to steady before a calculus exam. If Beacon advanced, we would seize the building, settle wage claims, and install our own administration. We had done it dozens of times before. It was clean business. Except this time, the founder was the golden child of my family, and the collateral damage might include my parents' retirement and 2 nieces who still believed their father ran the best school in Ohio. I reopened the internal chat and hovered over the icon that would flag a conflict to legal. One click and the gears would turn without me. One silence and the gears would grind right through Brian. I thought of Grandma's chipped mug of the night she said they would ask when they had no choice. The cursor blinked like a metronome measuring cowardice in microseconds. Which betrayal would hurt less, my voice or my quiet? I filed the conflict disclosure the next morning. Legal reviewed it in 48 minutes. By noon, Beacon's general counsel approved a limited advisory role under recusal with subject matter contribution. It was clean documented and cold. I wasn't allowed near the negotiations, but I'd be expected to flag technical risks, propose structural options, and weigh in on personnel retention, all the decisions that meant everything without ever being the face in the room. Monica, our COO, called me in. "No one else knows the ecosystem like you," she said, calm as always. "We can't leave this to a team who's never run an Ohio restructure." I nodded, but my stomach had the hollow weight of falling before impact. That afternoon, I pulled every internal memo tied to Next Mind. I found the numbers I expected, then worse. The teachers hadn't just missed paychecks. 5 had filed formal complaints. 1 campus aide had sent a handwritten letter to the county board describing broken HVAC units and second graders wearing coats inside. And then there was the line item that hit like a nail through wood, a junior debt note in the form of a personal bridge loan, $150,000 sourced from 2 private lenders named Richard and Elaine Walsh. My parents. They had pulled 6 figures from their retirement fund to prop up a school they'd never even toured. That night, Tom made pasta and set 2 bowls down with a quiet click. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt, just asked one question. "Are you still going to let him keep the story?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. The signal started small. A note buried in a regional news digest flagged operational irregularities at a STEM charter in Franklin County. The same day, one of our field analysts forwarded a screenshot from a parent forum Next Mind had canceled its fall robotics lab due to supply chain delays. But I'd seen that language before. It usually meant there were unpaid vendors, or worse, no staff left to run the program. 2 days later, I received a message from Sarah Kane, a legal consultant in Cleveland who occasionally audited our mergers. Her subject line was blunt, "FYI, Next Mind's in trouble." She'd been contacted to review severance scenarios for an incoming class of displaced employees. That only happened when a shutdown wasn't a possibility, it was a plan. And then came Karen. It was a Thursday night. I was finishing a late budget review when her name lit up my phone. My sister-in-law rarely called. She worked nights as a nurse, usually slept during the day. Her voice was soft, tired. "Linda, Brian says Beacon might be helping Next Mind. That you're involved." I froze. He knew. Is it true? Are you helping save the school?" I wanted to say yes, or no, or something. But I only managed. "It's early. A lot depends on how things unfold." She paused. "Okay. I trust you." Then the line went silent. I stared at the ceiling long after the call ended. trust spoken that quietly felt heavier than accusation. The driveway was full when Tom and I pulled in. Balloons swayed from the porch rail silver foil printed with 40 years strong. My mother, Elaine, had outdone herself again. Inside, the house buzzed. Cousins I hadn't seen in years milled around with paper plates of cheese cubes. A folding table held old photos in brass frames. Dad in a tux. Mom in a veil, Brian holding up his first science trophy like a miniature Olympic medal. I wasn't in any of the pictures. Brian was already holding court in the living room, a Napa Red in one hand and his other tucked casually into his blazer pocket. His voice rose above the rest. Next mine's expanding 2 more campuses by next year. We've got interest from Boston and Phoenix. Elaine beamed. He's always thinking big. Someone asked about funding. Brian smiled modestly. We're exploring a strategic partnership with an impact fund. Good terms, long runway. We're selective, of course. I stood in the kitchen pouring water, listening like a ghost behind the drywall. Then I heard it. Brian's voice lighter now. And Linda's here, my little sister who makes the best spreadsheets in the business. Laughter. Not cruel, just familiar. Tom reached for my hand under the counter. You okay? I nodded once. Dinner was buffet-style roast chicken and mashed potatoes and the green bean casserole my aunt insists on bringing. The dining room was tight, the kind of crowd where elbows touched and glasses clinked with every turn. I took a seat near the end of the table. Brian sat at the head, flanked by our parents, his wife Karen beside him, quiet. He raised his glass. To our parents, 40 years of love and building legacy. Cheers rose around him. My father dabbed at the corner of his eye. Then Brian leaned back, swirling his wine. And here's to the future. When your work speaks for itself, you don't need to explain. You just build. There it was, the line he always used, but this time I felt something shift in the air. A tremor, not yet sound. It was Grandma Ruth who broke the silence. She set down her fork not abruptly, but with intention, and folded her napkin with both hands. The motion was quiet, but something about it hushed the table. She looked at Brian, then at me. Then she said, Linda, did you bring the document? The room paused. The laughter, the silver clinks, the momentum of celebration suspended. I reached into my bag and placed a single sheet of paper beside my water glass. No folder, no dramatics, just the truth printed in 12-point calibri. My mother frowned. What's this? Ruth didn't blink. It's what Brian should have shared with you months ago. Brian shifted. Grandma, But she raised a hand. You had your moment, dear. Let her speak. I met my father's eyes first. It's a financial statement, from Beacon. Your retirement loan, your entire 6 figures, is tied to a school that's days away from state receivership. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. That's not possible. He said everything was thriving. I kept my voice level. He changed the business name, shifted the structure. He made sure none of you saw the red flags. Karen stared down at her plate. She didn't look surprised, just tired. Brian stood up. This is a hit job. She's jealous I've been building while she's been collecting reports. My father turned to him. Is it true Brian didn't answer? Ruth looked at me, not smiling but steady. They had a right to know. No one spoke after that. Forks rested on plates untouched. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen felt louder than usual. I looked around the table at people who had celebrated, cheered, toasted, and saw them blink one by one as the image cracked. The son who had been building, the daughter who had been silent. Only now did they understand which one had been holding the beams. I left before dessert. No one asked me to stay. Tom drove us back to the hotel in silence, his hand resting lightly on my knee. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just watched the Ohio night stretch out in gray fields and telephone poles, thinking about how quiet the house had gone after Ruth's words. The next morning, a voicemail waited from Karen. Thank you, she said, for saying it when I couldn't. Then, after a breath, I'm looking at jobs, somewhere out of state. Later that day, Dad called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. Your mother isn't speaking to anyone. I'm trying to understand what comes next. I didn't respond. Beacon completed the acquisition by the end of the month. Brian was removed from all operating positions. The new head of school asked if I'd like to visit. I declined. 3 weeks later, I received a package. No return label. Just an old mug carefully wrapped chipped on one edge. Inside a note in familiar handwriting, some things don't need fixing. Just noticing. R. I placed it beside the photo on my counter, me younger in front of that ribbon cutting. I still didn't smile when I looked at it, but I no longer looked away. I didn't go home for Christmas. Tom and I stayed in Boston. It snowed the morning of the 24th, soft and clean, the kind that makes the world look undecided. He made coffee. I wrapped 2 gifts for his niece, for his mother. None for mine. The group text from Elaine came mid-morning. A photo of the family gathered around the fireplace. Brian smiling. No caption. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed a proposal from a small rural district in western Pennsylvania. Their only charter school had been shuttered the previous spring. The community wanted to reopen it not as a tech hub, not as a brand, but as a place where kids could learn and stay warm and be seen. They didn't have a flashy name or media buzz, just handwritten letters from parents, a rough spreadsheet, and a borrowed gym. I called the superintendent, spoke for 42 minutes. She cried when I said Beacon would take the first step. That evening, I pulled the red folder from the cabinet. Not Brian's, but mine, my own notes, my models, my decisions. I started a new tab, labeled it 2026 Foundation. Tom asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said maybe later. Before bed, I poured a glass of water and turned out the lights. The city glowed in silence beyond the window. I stood for a long time at the counter, tracing the rim of that chipped mug Ruth had sent me. No one needed to know the whole story. They just needed to stop telling the wrong one. I saw Brian once more. A conference in D.C. 2 months later. He wasn't on the main stage, just a panelist speaking on entrepreneurial resilience. He wore a lighter suit, looked thinner, still smiled the same. He didn't notice me in the back. I didn't stay for the Q&A. Afterward, in the hallway, I passed a table stacked with brochures from new charter groups. No mention of Next Mind. No mention of him. That night, I flew home alone. Tom was visiting his sister in Vermont. Snow flurried against the window as the plane taxied. I opened my phone, scrolled to an old photo, Brian and me side by side on a swing set, our legs outstretched like wings. I didn't delete it, just moved it into a folder labeled Archived. At home, I placed Ruth's mug back on the shelf. It still had the chip. I never tried to fix it. Some things are meant to stay a little broken. So we remember where the crack was. I turned out the light. And that was the last time I explained anything. Maybe you were the one in the background holding everything up while someone else took the microphone. Maybe your name was never in the toast, though the whole table rested on your quiet strength. Or maybe, like Linda, you kept the receipts not for revenge, but because one day the story would bend and someone had to remember where it started. Families don't always lie. Sometimes they just choose the version that flatters them more. And sometimes they choose it so long they forget who paid the price. If you've ever stood up not to shout, not to shame, but simply to stop the lie from growing legs. If you've ever let the truth breathe even when it shook the room quiet, then you already know what it costs. You don't need to explain it here. Just leave a word, a name, a small mark. So the rest of us know we weren't the only ones who noticed. That's all. I don't need a like. I just need to know you understand.